Welcome back to Shareable. My name is Jeff Gibbard. I am your host. You probably know my voice already, but the gentleman on the other side of the microphone is Grant Crowell, and I have him here to talk about his new book, Grantasms, as well as what it's like to be a technologist living with ADHD and how that affects your career choices, how it affects how you go about a career in technology, and there's a lot of stuff we're going to discuss. So, Grant, what's up, man? Welcome to the show.
What is up? Hey, this is Sharelicious already. Hey, Jeff, it's. I was just talking before we hit the play button about it's kind of like a reunion for us. So many years. When I first saw you, I was speaking at a conference. I thought this dude gets it, and then I also thought, well, this dude is going to have a hard time dealing with all the junk that's out there, like I was dealing with the junk out there, and still am someday. So good for you for finding the good fight.
Thanks, man. Thanks. So in that was like back in like 2013, 2014, where you and I first met, I think. And at that point, I had never been on the other side of the microphone. I had only ever hosted a podcast. So I think you actually might officially be the first person that ever interviewed me. So
That's a good point. Yeah. The story behind that is I was hired by the conference folks to do shows for some of the featured speakers. And in all honesty, I heard of the names of a few, but there's no one I really just had any correspondence with. But I always want to do my homework and try to find out what were they passionate about, what was their point of view. And I had already gotten that about you early on, and you were probably the easiest and most fun interview that I could do. Others were just like completely stiff. They were just giving marketing spiel, and I just basically had to say, we gotta cut this. This is not gonna really be interesting to anyone too. But with you, your presentation was just so enjoyable and great. It was like you're being conversational, but you could also speak to a bunch of people at the same time, make everyone feel like you were talking with them. So yeah, that was when I got to interview you and had a great time. And it's like one of those things I think of, hey, if I could just only do that for a living, then life would be sweet.
Yeah, man. Well, it's interesting because I want to talk to you a little bit about what your experience in social media has been like over the past, I don't know, was that 7 years, I guess, since then. I've spoken at great lengths about how it's fallen out of favor for me and what social media has been like. But I would say the fact that we initially met back then and the fact that we've kept in touch this long virtually is really a testament to the fact that there still exists this silver lining in the world of online connections and communications where you can maintain friendships and acquaintances and professional, peer relationships just by using these tools. I mean, you and I, the last time we talked was, many moons ago. We connect now and again, but it's really it's a silver lining in what is otherwise sometimes a really, depressing and toxic type of environment. So what's social been like for you since we last really connected about it? I mean, is it still like a big part of what you're doing? I mean, at one point I remember you called yourself a social stylist, teaching
Yes.
important communication skills for the digital ecosystem.
Yeah. I mean, you try to be cute, not sound too wonky, and I still use that sometimes. Although today I've changed that into a twisted wordsmith or a social wordsmith, and that's been my gift that I've learned throughout the years. When we met, I think that was my very first job that I had that was directly involved in social media. I was a contractor on the social media team for CDW, a technology company that's now getting into network solutions, cloud solutions. So trying to go away from the idea of, oh, we just sell stuff to consumers to now let's build stuff for the infrastructure and hopefully try to get some large enterprise clients. And so that's when they brought someone like me in for their team. And my background happened to be video. I was involved in the early years of video and for a few publications. There's just something about that, even though I wasn't a great video producer, I can marry the marketing side with the production side to these two groups that didn't speak that much together. And then when social came around, I, along with the publishers of a publication called Real SEO that eventually got bought out, were really talking at length about social video. And I like the idea that it could be the most visceral communications medium, but at the time, it was being bogged down by a lot of people who just sucked at doing it or treated it like it was an infomercial. So I worked for CDW for a year, and I was trying to impart that stop with the commercials, show real people, and just be helpful. I was still not that close to the decision makers to make as big of an impact, but I made some impact. And I could show the results, actual data say, see, this works versus compared to what you were doing beforehand. So later, that got me a job as a social media director for a local agency. I also worked at a YouTube company that I managed the Procter & Gamble accounts for Olay and Swiffer. And when I say Olay, I jokingly and say it's true. I know a lot about women's skincare from having optimized probably near 1,000 videos. So I was telling them, I was saying, hey, to the social team, answer these people's questions on here. And they were ignoring all these things. So on the agency side, it was depressing for me to see is thinking that just push stuff out and not engage with your audience, not treat it as customer care. So later, I then decided, hey, I don't want to be doing the agency stuff. I was getting depressed by it. I thought I would take a job at an actual book publisher company, being the social media manager there. However, that turned out to not be what it was advertised for me. I learned after just 2 months there that I was expected to get the company 1 million fake likes. And that is not in my ethos, and certainly for saying, no, I can't do that, but how about we do this the right way and treat it as customer care, which I was able to prove was working and helping with sales. No, they didn't want that, so they let me go. So I spent a year trying to do smaller stuff for smaller companies, smaller businesses, working directly. And the fun part was I got to get my hands dirty with things I enjoyed: the interviews, the talking, I'd be able to produce a lot of videos. And one video just for a Facebook page, I got 14,000 views organically because the interviews were just authentic. And I love telling people stories. And since I already had a video background, I'm not a great video producer, but I know how to tell a story. And I would always engage with people in the audience there so I could build a rapport. So I got to do that for a long, long time until I actually ended up working where I have been now. And that's been as a contractor for Dell Technologies, a company I really enjoy. And I think it's been that way for like 1 year and 2 months. And I get to work with the social media, social business team that has a really good sense of ethics and values. But along the way, I did get very jaded about when people say social or say things like connection, but what they really just mean is access, and they don't mean relationship building. And I think that's hard when you are wired, I think like you and I are, for thinking in terms of this is supposed to mean something, like an extension of our humanity, rather than as a way to manipulate others or to try to do something to such a large scale to fool people into thinking that you're being social. And I think that's part of why I did this book, Grantasms, some creative twisted words for cool people, because one part of the book is all the frustrations I would have in the social media space over how it seemed to be very hypocritical or how it seemed to be very disingenuous. But at the same time, I'm not a purist, but I understand we need to have a profit motive and be sustainable. But so much of it seemed to be just bad for our health. And how to wrestle with that. And I decided, well, I'm going to get out of social media. I'm going to get off of some of the social media channels. I'm going to do the stuff that makes me feel good. And I'm going to focus more on the quality of the relationships I have. I cut out a lot of things in Facebook and LinkedIn and others, and I instead put my energies for the people I knew. And I found it made me a lot healthier of a person. But I found along the way, if I could come up with words for my frustrations, I would be in a much better mood to deal with it, as opposed to things that would typically get me in trouble in earlier years, including when I met you too. Is I would too easily respond to things without thinking or pausing, because social was getting the better of me. I look at social as this: is for some people it is just a means to get what you want, and for others it's a value system. But when you're treated as a value system, you get emotional about it, and when you get emotional about it, you run the risk of not keeping your emotions in check. And sometimes it's nice to be able to just go with the flow. And other times it means it can get you in trouble. And honestly, sometimes it got me in trouble. So, but at least I found with me doing this book, I could write about those mistakes. And then the next time it happened, I'd laugh at them. And I actually found it stopped those behavior. And I could teach this to other people. And I found, wow, this isn't just good for me. It really works for a lot of other people. So that's the trajectory of where I met you, my very first job in social media, to where I am today, where I can be social and work with really good people in a good culture, but also manage it and not have it manage me.
Yeah, there's so much there I want to unpack with you. I mean, let's start with just communication, because I think that that's a good catch-all for so many of the different things that you touched on the one hand, you mentioned storytelling and the importance of, you said you might not be the greatest video producer or video editor, but you can tell a good story, right? And that's such an important part of being successful in really any sort of marketing, is being able to tell a good story. At the same time, you're also talking about uh, coming up with your own kind of words and language to communicate certain ideas, to kind of help you deal with some of the frustration that comes with being emotionally attached to the outcome of the work that you're doing versus what it's actually looking like and shaping up to be in practice. So talk to me a little bit about, I guess the inspiration behind creating this book, and maybe some of your favorite Grantasms as you're going through this, if you could. But what was the impetus behind even creating a book around these sort of things? Where did it start for you, and why did you decide to go through it? Because writing as a book is a pretty hefty task, as I'm sure you're now well aware.
Oh, yeah. Well, I even had that experience even before I wrote my own book, when I was hired to write other people's books, especially when I was on a subject I didn't even really know that much about, and then being expected to write in that person's voice. And I'd say the thing for me is, and probably you would agree, is when I wrote this book, I came out a better person. It wasn't what I thought it was originally going to be. It came out something much better, but it took way, way more time. But now once you've done it, you now know what your theme is for all things moving forward, including other books moving forward. So I wrote this. If I had to say, first, to start off with, what is my differentiator? And I remember when talk with guests on your show about what's that thing that they always remember that makes them stand out. And what I thought of was this: is I would always do creative things, even though sometimes I could be very socially awkward. And part of that came from my undiagnosed and untreated ADHD for several decades. Well, I also found out that while I was an early cartoonist, I did in high school, I did for several colleges, I was even picked up in college press services. And one year when I was 20 years old, I hadn't thought of it at the time, but I'm from Hawaii, born and raised. I won the state of Hawaii an art competition throughout the entire state. And I won the category of communications. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know there was such a category called communications. I thought, okay, I'm a cartoonist, I'm an artist. And that was lost on me. Yet I had beaten out all these other people whose work I thought was way better for the cartoons I did. At the time, I did a cartoon series called Johnny Extremity, which was basically my alter ego to mock extremism, but kind of just satirizing it and showing on how groups on the left or the right or even center or wherever could be so similar in their actions if you just took out the behaviors. And that worked pretty well for me for a while, and getting attention back when there was so many fewer media channels to do. As a college newspaper back then, me growing up, that was what people on college campus, that's what they're always talking about, just like the local college radio station too. And that was a very exciting time. However, I grew up in a space that was, I'd say, very conservative in terms of not making waves, pardon the pun. It was much more about tourism, much more about things that are lucky you live in Hawaii kind of stuff. And I was tipping over those sacred cows. So my type of humor was not really suitable for what was considered by those who owned, owned a publishing station or who could produce books in Hawaii to be mass marketable for their audience. And that was understandable. I just couldn't find that audience too when I eventually moved to Chicago. Then I was told my work was too polished for that group. So it was just unfortunate luck that it didn't work out for me. I was a professional graphic designer for a long time, but working for very conservative companies, financial institutions. So I wasn't really getting my outlet, so to speak. So, but I was always coming up with fun words. And I would do that in all of my cartoons. I would just do that in all of my artwork that I'd share. Sometimes I could get other people's names, and I never thought about that kind of stuff. And then I would be doing it all the time at work, and people would ask me for fun things at work. Like one time, I remember when people were getting really stressed out about the internet going out, I would say, well, we don't have an internet, we have an internet. And that actually helped with breaking the ice with people who weren't talkative. So the next time the internet went out on us, they brought it up, they laughed, and it actually brought people together over a shared frustration. So then I found some things that really bothered me. And the things that bothered me most were the things where people just didn't pay attention to how they came across with their choice of words. I mean, I listened to the previous guest, Lori Geist, and what struck me so well was she said how important it is to pay attention to the words you choose, but also something else I remember. That was creativity plus humor equals connection. And I found that you can be super creative and be a master storyteller if you can come up with a special word or phrase that describes a shared frustration or a shared experience, a commonality, but it still tells your uniqueness and how when you can tell your own story. It's like your prompt. So the next time that happens, people remember that about you. They think you're creative, they think you're charismatic, and it builds your confidence. So I found myself doing that more and more. Like one word in the book I'd use is filler flabber, which is the overuse of filler words so drastic that it distracts from the important content you have to say, and it creates distrust, and it just drives other people crazy. Like the person says, 300 times. And I kid you not, I listened to a professional podcast of a professional guest saying, 300 times in 22 minutes. How do I know? Because I went back and I listened to it the entire time and I couldn't pay attention to anything else. Just like when I would hear 20-somethings who still call me, or vendors I work with at 20-somethings, and nothing against 20-somethings, but sometimes the product of the culture is not thinking about certain words, or filler flabber, like saying the words, oh, perfect, or awesome, over things that aren't awesome. I mean, in my book, I tell an actual situation of when my partner, her dad died. I came back home. I get a call from a young recruiter. She says to me, oh, so how are you doing? I said, well, I just had to deal with a funeral. And she went, oh, that's awesome. I said, no, that's the exact opposite of awesome. And
Yeah.
it's like, it was just the idea of treating words as a commodity of, now I have to get to the next one and the next one and the next one, that built such distrust. Now this person wasn't being malicious in any way, but it created such distrust of, you clearly are not even paying attention to what I actually have to say. Just like if somebody wants to ask how you're doing, I won't say fine. I might say something more like, I'm incredibly average. Now, not all the time, but because I want to just put a little effort in it sometimes when it's in proper context, like at a Trader Joe's or someplace where I know they'll laugh. If I can tell the person is maybe just having a hard day, I won't do it. But those are the kind of things where I would come up with stories around what I'd say, if it was online, a digital douche, like an online faux pas from either a human or computer error, or a combination of both. And sometimes there are people like those who just don't know any better or don't realize how they come across, versus the asshole. And that's what we are trying to distinguish, and basically to be able to pause. And I did these words to say, sometimes we may come across that way, and we don't want to be perceived that way as uncaring. But sometimes when we are expected to do so much, we're going to get distracted. The ADHD thing. We're going to sometimes let our emotions get the better of us. We're sometimes going to do impulsive behavior. We're sometimes going to have too many tabs open. So I came up with words for this, like note of friction. When you feel anxiety over forgetting to turn off the notifications on your digital device, kind of thing. Stuff like that. But I would also come up with for relationships. Like I know, since you're an expert on covering ways to treat online data marketing, I come up with okay, stupid, modern guide to date mating, where I can come up with words that could be really, really handy for those who want to be a little better about how they come across. Like I could say an endorphin, a friend who gives you an endorphin rush. And so that could be a creative way of building a connection there. So sometimes these are great for icebreakers. Other times they're a great way of channeling your negative energy and turning it into creativity. Like I'll even give one that I enjoy called a male snail, which is an old boy toy, or a sourdough, a former sugar daddy that has lost their boy toy or their girl toy. And that makes it easier to deal with things. Like my partner, Karen, and I, we refer to each other as spousish, because we aren't married, but we've been together for 10 years. We're a lot more than a boyfriend, girlfriend. And that's something even conservative folks can get. We're spouse-ish.
Yeah.
And so always is the key isn't for people who are like you, but people who aren't like you. And that word will be that prompt for where they have a nice, fun experience. And when they laugh, and laugh is a great icebreaker, it basically overcomes barriers. You start making connections with people you didn't think where connections were possible. So this book is really the best connections I've made over the past 5 years.
So I love the fact that you're using your creativity to do plays on words, and you're trying to find ways to, get people to giggle over something and have that moment of like, oh, I get what he means there, right? Like spousish is like a really, I think, salient example where you can say, oh, I get where he's going with that. So you've come up with these words, you use these words, you wrote a book around them. I guess there's kind of two pieces of it. One is the purpose to kind of inspire people to think up their own sort of versions of these so that they can see the power in being able to play with language a little bit more to create connection. So that's the kind of first question I have for you. And then the second being is that as someone who is, open about their struggles with ADHD, I want you to talk a little bit about how these have helped you um, to be able to stay on topic and to be able to have more clear and coherent communications. I think one of the things that at least I struggle with is going off on tangents or being excited by when I talk with my podcast guests, one of the things that happens to me is they'll say like three things and I'm like, oh my God, which of those do I jump onto? Which one do I go after? So, talk to me a little bit about how this has been therapeutic for you. I know you mentioned a little bit that this is something that you use to actually deal with and manage some of your struggles with connections. Talk to me a little bit about those two kind of pieces together. And just to reiterate them, the one is it to encourage people to do it themselves, and then two, how has it helped you?
Certainly. Well, you're right. The two are so interconnected. So attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, in itself a word that has long time brought negative connotations. So you can imagine as someone having to have that label for a long time of how it affects your attitude towards yourself. Now, I think it's a lot more, it's a lot better understood today. And there are even some people who treat it as a gift. I treat it as it's there, like everything else. And it's something, it can be a gift, it can be a curse if you don't know how to deal with it. For me, my story was, I remember my parents taking me to a psychiatrist when I was 4 years old. I had all of the behaviors, very much so, but this was also Hawaii, and this was a long time back, so it wasn't widely understood in the psychiatric industry, and especially not carrying over to Hawaii, of what ADHD was. So I still have the manual typewriter letter saying all these things, but with no diagnosis. And the psychiatrist saying, we don't really understand how to deal with this, but perhaps you could try this or that. And so my parents did the best they could, but that got me in a lot of trouble. It got me bullied a lot because kids didn't get me and I didn't get them. And teachers didn't get it. And of course, going to a public school in Hawaii, it was really that you're just lazy, you're not trying, when really I could not pick up certain words. I was not getting social cues, especially if something was boring. I mean, I even remember crying as a kid when I was 6 years old because I would try to read a science book over and over and over and it wouldn't stick with me. And things were a lot more boring back then. I mean, the material was just way boring. Teachers didn't think about how to make things interesting, or at least not my teachers did. When I was in a different environment, I could thrive. But in that environment, it was just hell for a kid like myself. So things like sports, or that were a very good way that I excelled at really well, was great. And that also helped with the ADHD for making me active, which made my brain active. But I didn't know this. Being a cross-country public school champ in Hawaii was also helpful for me too. It also gave me some confidence, but I lacked social skills. And the social skills was always my weakness. And like I didn't date for until I was like 19 years old. So I had those things that made me very, very awkward. So with the ADHD, for me, it was things such as being highly distractible, going off on tangents, that, sometimes you come up with great stuff, but I could be creative, but not necessarily productive. Maybe I could if I was getting my cartoons out there, but there was all these other responsibilities I had. Like a word I have for that is important, boring, but important. That's where words today help me with reminding me of what I got to get done. But the connections for me is what I was missing, and what I was missing in not having long-term good relationships, not having that many friends, not sticking with a job. And that really, really hurts you. It really, really hurt me. Whereas I had my own company for 10 years, Grantastic Designs, which was an early SEO website company, and I could do really good things for other people. But in terms of the responsibility of running a full-time business, I was not good at that. I managed to do it for 10 years, but I was still not good at that. So what the words helped me do was help me to focus, because then it would make me pause. And too often today, people Doesn't matter whether it's ADD, ADHD, or wherever you are on the spectrum, or you're neurotypical. We struggle with this to different degrees. Some of us have similar environments to deal with, where we have to work in spaces that requires us to focus while dealing with distractions. Or maybe you have to deal with irate people, or maybe you have to deal with people who you can't stand, but you got to work with too. Whole bunch of stuff. Or maybe you're not getting enough sleep or enough exercise. I just say for the ADHD person, the difference is frequency and amplification. It affects that person because they're further along the spectrum. If I had to use an analogy, it's like having a costume that can give you some fun powers, but you've lost the instruction manual, so you keep crashing into buildings in a way.
Yeah.
But once you know what you have, there's actually a fun early 80s show called The Greatest American Hero that analogy is based on too. Go Google that one. You'll find some good YouTube clips. But once you understand what you have, the first step is awareness of what you have, and then talking with other people who have that. And that's where you get the epiphany. Because when I went to my first ADHD meetup, it was a support group in Chicago. I thought to myself, oh gosh, these people are so freaking annoying. And then I realized, wow, I must be that same way. I can't shut up sometimes, or I'm not paying the social cues. Now, it's through things like cognitive behavior therapy. I take some medication. I exercise a lot. I get good sleep. I practice mindfulness. I journal. In my book, I call it Playful Mindfulness, which is a way to have fun and not to get bored. But I found if I could look at everything as creative opportunity, I would stay focused. And if I stay focused, I'm channeling anything that's either negative or distraction into reminding me of what I need to be focused on to get done. Like I say, there's creativity, which is the ideas, and then there's productivity, which is getting stuff done so that I can have more time to do the things that I want. So all this goes around to, I was able to teach other people this who weren't ADHD. Because to some degree, a lot of it could be environment or other issues, sometimes health, struggle with the same things. Just like if we had a shared experience, then I could give them a word, or maybe they would ask me for a word. Like even just today, I work with a contractor where we don't get paid when our agency decides to take a week-long vacation. So I call that, we don't have a vacation, we have a what the hey vacation. We have a what the heycation. What the hell? Or somebody was describing to me and asking for a word just today on, what do you call it when you haven't eaten a piece of food for so long you forgot how good it is and you eat again? I said, yeah, that's called a foogasm. And I just came up with those. And now already that's a word that they say they're going to use and share with other people and tell me they've had a laugh over it. And that's where I realized, okay, this isn't just for me. This isn't even just for people who like to come up with words or say, hey, I wish I had a word for that. This is for people that are trying to make better connections. Two types of connections. Internal connections, the types we just talked about here: focus, executive function, working memory, those type of things. How you manage your emotions too. The other type of connection is external, the social. By social, making a human bond, exchanging information, however that information can come. Sometimes, and in this case, my information comes through words. So that's how I found, by talking with a bunch of other people who, by the way, were the inspiration for a lot of these words here, to say, okay, this is not just a hobby. This is a real opportunity that word creations can actually be fun connections.
Well, I think you've, whether consciously or unconsciously, you've really pointed out something that's a really powerful mechanism known as anchoring, which is where you really tie one idea to another, or you tie something to a word, or you tie it to an event. The idea is you anchor an idea to something else. And I think that you've used that really, really effectively. And I think to the point of those who struggle with, or in some cases benefit from ADHD, that's a really, really helpful mechanism to be able to keep yourself focused and to give yourself something to come back to keep yourself on point. I talk with a lot of people about ADHD just in general, because, in my circles, I'm often the poster boy for it. And I'm sure you have a similar sort of thing. But I'll talk sometimes with parents, and they'll say, like, I think my child has ADHD. And they seem to have like almost like a little bit of sadness in their voice about it, right? And the way I look at it, and you kind of alluded to this, you talked about, whether you think it's a superpower or a weakness. I know you spoke with Peter Shankman at one point about it, and he's, all in on the ADHD as a superpower. I am kind of in that camp, but I also believe kind of where you say, where it's a little bit of both, right? Like it can be a superpower at times, but it can be a weakness. And I think your analogy was really, really good. That, you find a super suit, but and it does amazing things, but you forget the directions, keep smashing into things. The other side, and this is the thing I try to remind parents when, especially if they're not particularly, ADHD themselves, if they have no real experience with it, I try to remind them that the other side of the deficit disorder is that hyper focus. And I assume you probably have the same thing, but I know for me, when I get into a task, like I can sit at my desk for 10 to 15 hours. If I'm not interrupted, if my focus is not broken, if I can get that ball rolling, it will roll all the way down the hill and become the largest snowball possible. I will crush 20,000 words of writing at a time. I will, edit 17 podcasts. Like I can do all of the things at once. And that's been, for me, one of the ways that I've had to learn to hack this way that I operate, is that I have to learn how to get that focus going. I think that's one of the, and this is where I wanted to circle back to on this. So we started out talking a little bit about communication and the challenges with ADHD. When we met, one of the first things that struck me about you was that you're very much a facilitator, and you're the type that gets shit done, basically, right? Like, so you're a person who's familiar with the technology, you pick things up, you learn how to do it, you get it done, but at the same time, you do struggle with that shiny object syndrome, the keeping yourself on task. So there's this sort of intersection that happens for those of us who have ADHD. I'm curious how it's played out for you. We talked a little bit about how it works for you with communication and how some of these words have helped you to stay focused and stay on task. How are you able to, or what are some of the steps you've taken in your life to be able to mitigate that, squirrel, the thing where you just get distracted by things, and stay on task and be able to have a successful career as you've had, doing the variety of different things you've done, both being able to get it done, but also being able to learn how to do those things so that you can do it?
Yeah, good question. So one thing that I try to do is look for, like you said, the positives. And let's just use the example of hyperfocus. One thing is I can say that it can both be a superpower or a stupid power. Like superpower when you need to work on this for the next 8 hours. A stupid power when you got to be doing other stuff in those 8 hours too.
Yeah, that's true.
That's why sometimes I think we place too much emphasis on the things that we think make us I wouldn't say the word better, but I think it's easy for some people to get involved thinking because I've been diagnosed with this, that all I need to do is tell myself, oh, I got these superpowers. And of course, sometimes as a former Marvel Comics buff, when I hear that word, I sometimes get, oh yeah, right. Because I'm thinking, okay, you can't do laser beams. You can't jump over tall buildings in a single bound kind of thing. And I've heard that word across the area sometimes when people want to call people superheroes, when all they're doing is, I'm just doing my freaking job already. Or people who, and I'll say this, the ADHD community, it's like, because you're just supposed to do things that normal people do, that's not a superpower. That's just you being expected to be part of the community. It's like there's a time to blend in and there's a time to stand out.
But
and
push back on you on that real quick, because so the company that I just recently started is called the Superhero Institute, and the superhuman framework, the 5-part framework that I think is really the key to unlocking your potential is 5 different pieces. It's learning, thinking, communicating, leading, and realizing. So if you can master those 5 different things, you're capable of just about anything, because you're able to learn it, you're able to think and understand how it fits, communicate it to others, lead others to do it, and then actually implement it to make it happen, right? So that's how, and those are all very basic things, right? Like, to be a leader is a very difficult thing. There's a lot of complexity to doing it effectively, but ultimately, if that's your job, right? The way I would look at it, and I think the way that I kind of come at the whole superpower conversation, especially as it relates to ADHD, you know what? Let me take it out of the ADHD for a second. I'll give you a different example. I'm an entrepreneur. And that is both my greatest superpower and it is my greatest weakness. I envy the fact that there are people that can go to a job and that they can exist there. They can deal with the office politics. They can have someone tell them no and not throw an absolute temper tantrum.
Mhm.
At the same time, I know that it's a superpower for me to be able to deal with the pressures of being an entrepreneur, to be able to self-motivate, to be able to handle all of the different tasks and skills that I need to know to be able to run my business. So when I talk about ADHD, or when I think others talk about ADHD, the way that I hear it and the way that I intend to say it when I'm talking about it is that it's something that gives you that is something that you do better than most. And it doesn't mean that you're able to leap tall buildings or have super strength, although some people may, but it's just something that you have a natural ability for. And when you lean into it, um, it can give you an advantage over other people in that particular thing. Now, like superheroes, you're a Marvel, if you're into the comic books at all and everything, you realize that every single superhero and every single superpower comes with its own drawback to it, right? So there's the other side of it. So ultimately, I think that's what it comes down to when we talk about superpowers and if you're talking about ADHD and you're looking at the upsides and downsides to it. I think your point is really well taken. I hadn't thought about that, but there is a downside to the hyper focus. I've only ever really talked about it as being an upside.
Yeah,
Because
and one thing that's also good to mention is this is where the choice of words comes in, because there's superhuman, and that will be X-Men, that will be Avengers. And then there's superpowers. And this is why I'm careful about saying the word superpower. Everything you described is a great characteristic. It's a great, I can even say power. And sometimes people use the word superpower in the context of something you excel at that seems to come effortlessly. At least it appears that way.
yeah,
And that's been used. The other side is there are so many groups, not just ADHD groups, that use this word that becomes filler flabber, because it describes things that sometimes could just seem like, well, I do that. And it's not that distinctive as, I mean, even though our journey to doing that feels amazing for us, just like my Grantasms, that is my gift that I had to work at a long time. I don't think I'd call it a superpower unless these words could somehow give people, blind people, make them able to see, kind of thing. But this is all in a way kind of splitting hairs. But the reason why doing this book made me a lot more careful about the words, including words in the ADHD lexicon, because it sometimes turns off people who aren't that way. Of now two camps, those who is the woe is me, to the I'm a superhero kind of thing. And I kind of find the way to make connections isn't with these words that sound so self-aggrandizing, because it does turn off some people. I know that's hard because that's not how it's intended. I find that if there could be other words, like master tasking is a word that I like to use as a way of being able to accomplish some things that seem effortlessly. That tends to get me a better reaction than just like on the opposite side would be messy tasking, which is what ADHD people do when they want to call, say, multitasking, or multi-crashing, which is something I used to do, which is physically bump into something because I'd be on a digital device. So I could say, hey, I am on all these devices. My ADHD, I can have multiple tabs open. Well, I've screwed up doing that too. Sometimes you can. And that's what I did in social media. So it's really a matter of kind of checking yourself, but also having someone else, which is a whole part that we even talked about, the accountability partner, because there's how we perceive ourselves in the world and our performance. And then there's somebody else who can call us on our BS sometimes. Sometimes that's a significant other. Sometimes it's a coworker who you really, really trust. But that's kind of why certain words I find can become filler flabber, not by the basis of that they're not meant to uplift us, but how they can be perceived by other people who take that in a whole different connotation. Like, hey, I remember to flush the toilet today. I'm super powered, kind of thing. I know it's exaggeration, but it happens sometimes.
Fair. I think that's fair, but at the same time, I think we could look at it as, we can celebrate others for something that they do well, maybe just a little bit better than other people, and look at it as their superpower. Because so I worked for this company called Gap International. It's a management consulting firm. similar methodology to the landmark companies that are derivative of, I think, EHT or one of those things. Anyway, it's a consulting firm that deals in breakthrough methodology, the idea that like your thinking gives you your action, give you your results. One of the things that they use the word very liberally, not liberally, but they use it generously, is the word genius, like discovering your genius, finding the things that, you do extraordinarily well. And I think that's something where, and especially when you're dealing with a loaded term, right? Like ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? So it's almost, to me, I think, bringing in the concept of it being your superpowers or looking at the bright side of it. I think that's empowering to somebody who may have seen as like, there's something wrong with me, especially when, as you mentioned, like school for me was a similar thing. I was a class clown. I could not pay attention if the class did not suit my interests. And I still, to this day, I double down on all my strengths and I don't really give a crap about anything else that I'm not particularly good at. Right. So that's the method that I take with it. So I don't know, man. I feel like there's nothing really wrong with using the superhero and talking about people's gifts. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that, but just I think it's fine for us to celebrate what's right about us versus what's wrong with us. And on the ADHD side of things, especially when I'm talking with parents about it, I like to try and highlight why it is a superpower at times.
Yeah, and we both have the same goal, which is to put this in a positive mindset, which is exactly why I did this book, because I look at it as how to flip frustrations into creations, word creations. And that makes you feel empowered. And if someone in the company who gets you says, that's my superpower, that's great, because they're not thinking of you and you're not thinking of yourself as I can do all these things and I should be in an Avengers movie kind of thing, which itself is fantasy fiction. I guess what I'm going for is to have positivity without always trying for hyperbole. And by that mean that you can say things that make you special, gifted, desirable, but also sometimes in a way where you can even wield just a little bit of self-deprecation. Like I'll use one word. I have one chapter that's kind of relevant to the ADHD called Super Socialize Me, Grantasms for Gurks. And a Gurk is a name I came up with, a person who identifies as a geek, nerd, a dork who is striving to be a remarkable social citizen. I mean, I define those things as this. A geek is your passion. A nerd is your expertise. A dork is yourself. In other words, you being you. And it all came down to where you can take this creativity and get over your awkwardness by learning to be mindful of social context. So if I would use the word Gurk, and I actually use this word at a Chicago Mensa event in 2014, people who were ADHD, mild autism, Asperger's, they used it because they had these issues too. They could be wildly intelligent, but the social skills are really poor. And one person told me that if he could use that word to communicate how he described himself, I look back at that and say that could be a charismatic way of making an impression with somebody that could have the same effect as convincing yourself that you have a superpower. Whether it's really the same thing, all this is, it's just the choice of words and how we communicate those words to people who may not get it. Like I'll give one good example is I don't do name tags. I do face tags, which is a name tag where I draw a cartoon face of myself. That is one of my gifts. I'm a cartoonist. And anytime I'm at a meetup or a party, I always try to find the mark and I always try to draw a cartoon of myself. In the book, it shows all the face tags I've done. And people remember me that way in a really positive way. And that's where I could mention this thing as, hey, I'm the social wordsmith. That's my, if you want to call it, the superhero name in a way. And like I said, it's okay to call yourself these words in the company that gets you. The issue is being mindful that people aren't going to always see these words the same way that you do, because so much of the words we use today, we're all supposed to be speaking English, but we're not really speaking the same language sometimes. Like again, when I went back to it, somebody says perfect or awesome. Your eye will be jaded. Someone else isn't thinking of those things too. So that was my point of the book, is if you can come up with something new, something that is creative. And by creative, I mean novel, newness, but also valuable, it's beneficial to you and others, then you are building a connection where you both are speaking the same language. You both get each other. You're in a better mood, they're in a better mood, and you feel more comfortable with having conversations.
What I like about what you're talking about here also alludes to something that kind of comes out of this. I want to ask you a question before I point it out. Do you happen to remember what color my sneakers were when we did our interview?
No, and if I guessed, I would probably guess wrong. I would say red. Wrong?
Nope, they're red. I wear bright red sneakers.
Well then.
So when I do my name tags, I usually put not just my name, but I'll also put at Jay Gibbard, my Twitter name.
That I remember, actually.
Yeah.
You're
So
memorable.
yeah. So that's the point I want to touch on, is that, when you're talking about these invented words, one of the things that I think that you create that connection, what that connection is you're creating a moment of memorability. And there are people that know me by my bright red sneakers. There are people that know me because I put hashtags and Twitter handles on my hello name tags. There are people that know me because I'm the energetic guy. Then there's a whole handful of people that met me and then connected with me on LinkedIn and know me as the world's most handsome social media and content marketing strategist. So I'm always looking for those moments to try and create memorability. And I think what you've done here is, in addition to anchoring and creating that opportunity to anchor to a particular idea for yourself internally, you're also creating it for people externally, that when you say one of those words, it becomes memorable. You give them an opportunity to remember you by that particular thing. And because it's unique and it's different, it will stand out. It's not like remembering the word, like, I don't know, like boat. Like everybody knows that word, but when you have a different word, a unique way of describing something, like I think Girk is a really good one. That was the one out of all the words you've said so far that I think has resonated with me the most, because for a long time, I was ashamed of all of the things that made me geeky the way I am, and the things that I nerded out about, and the fact that I was just dorky about doing voices and drawing my own cartoons and whatever. So I like that empowers you to kind of own those three aspects of your personality. But it's a different thing that you can now remember. It's a new word added to it. And you go, where did you remember that from? Where did you get that from? And it points back to you. So I think memorability as a factor here is one of the things that really should come out of this for people as they're listening, is the book, whether you use any of the Grantasms in the book or not, the idea of finding ways to make yourself more memorable when you connect with people gives you the opportunity for that connection and to be remembered.
Right. And I do talk about how to be remarkable, which is part of memorability in a good way, which the next part, the social part, is, boy, this all brings back to being share worthy, where you feel comfortable enough and confident enough to share that memorability. And what we're talking about is to bring up a memory. We're talking about, and that comes down to, we use the word anchor. I've used the word prompt. Some people might say the word trigger. And I did this book of all the words that really appealed to me, hence why I call them Grantasms, but also because I believe that I found a lot of these words were what enough people would find something and saying, that's me. That is so me in there. I mean, I had probably like about 20 reviewers, and I said, just pick the ones that resonate with you. And I said, now tell me a little story about it too. And because it was important that they told me a little story about how it related to them. Like there's one other word in the same chapter by Girk called a solitude. And that's someone who appears as a calm and collected individual because they're comfortable with being by themselves in solitude. Not loneliness, but to be able to take a break and they feel comfortable with not having to be around a crowd. And that was based on one of my business coaches, Brian Kramer, who does Human to Human.
Oh,
And he wrote an article. Yeah, fantastic guy. Him and Courtney Kramer are really helpful with me with also doing this book. He's actually one of the blurbs in my book too, because it was the value system in there. So it's not, I want to make sure this didn't read like a boring dictionary. And what makes this distinctive is these are all my little personal stories. They're like micro stories. They're snack size. Some are a little longer, but the whole goal is to encourage people on how to tell their own stories. And there's a whole section in the book of here's my secret sauce, so to speak. Not so secret, because my bigger goal is, one part is you just want to have fun, and fun is how we learn. The next part is we've had a lot of fun. Now here's how you could do this in a way that is fun by yourself with other people. I mean, I look at this as being, it can be very good in marketing, the external side, when you want to come up with the words to tell a story. But the other side is internally. Maybe people who, maybe there's a new manager and they're not really getting across to now that people they have to manage. They never worked on those social skills. This is a really good team building exercise. It's really good for workshops. I've already seen how it can be done in a game format. You could say, make up a word for this scenario or situation, and you already win because you've now improved your creativity. And you've had a conversation with someone, which is how we remember things. It's the social aspect. It's not just, I just did this creative thing. I shared it with somebody, and now I've built a bond. And so that external bond has created that internal bond. And I've even talked with a neuroscientist at NC State who explained this to me and how it triggers different parts of the brain working together. Now, I didn't include all that research in here. I want this to be more of a fun book, but there is some real science to how word creations create fun connections, because when we're playing, when we have playful mindfulness, we are now able to focus, and it helps remove the anxiety we might otherwise feel.
I smell a board game coming on this. When's the Kickstarter?
I have thought of a board game. I've thought of a calendar, shirts with the best Grantasms, even a way where people could pick their Grantasm and have that already on the shirt. A board game with like Cards Against Humanity meets OkCupid.
Yeah,
in a way,
yeah,
right?
I could see that really working. Well, I mean, I see that, and I'm sure there's a lot of science to back this up as you're explaining it. It makes perfect sense that there is, the creativity of combining words to make things work together to have a cogent and coherent meaning to it. It makes perfect sense that would fire up different parts of your brain. So obviously there's a lot of value here with, as we talked about, memorability, anchoring, focus, things like that. So this is something that you've developed over time as, to a certain extent, a coping mechanism, but also just something that you found that's super helpful for you in social situations. So I want to turn to talking a little bit about advice for people who either currently are adults that have ADHD and are looking for different things that they might want to start, because you found this and you found it very helpful for you, but it came from somewhere. At some point you had a recognition that this was a thing that provided value to you. So for one, thinking about the people who are adults, but secondarily and related, anybody who's a parent that's raising a child who has ADHD and may not know what to do, what advice would you give either of those two groups about learning to manage within having having ADHD to better be able to create focus so you can better learn, have more clarity of thought, be able to communicate more clearly, being able to get stuff done?
Well, first I'd say get my book, Grantasms, Creative Twisted Words for Cool People. Now on Amazon in paperback and ebook format. Okay. Wait, no, okay. But, well, I won't, as someone who is a non-parent, but I've worked with a lot of kids with ADHD, teenagers especially, as well as parents where one parent or sometimes both has it. And when I say on the spectrum, there's variances. Sometimes other things come with it. Sometimes it could also come with a bit of depression too. And it's like these things, like I mentioned in the book, I dealt with a huge physical ailment that was life-threatening, sleep apnea, which is funny because I used to be a pretty good cross-country and track runner. But over time, I developed a health situation where I had so much flesh in my throat. Sounds disgusting, but I was just building flesh in my throat that I was choking on my own flesh. And I would basically not be able to breathe, which mean a lack of oxygen in my brain. So imagine that and dealing with ADHD is just the worst scenario. And I go over that into detail. And basically I had life-saving surgery over that in 2006. So from the talks that I've had with those, as somebody who is not a therapist, I mean, I call myself a not spurt. I'm not an expert, but I can relate to a lot of people. And I am different. And as the advertising guru Sally Hogshead says, different is sometimes better than better. When I go to conferences with ADHD therapists and clinicians and psychiatrists, they miss the human element. They miss the fun element. They miss of how can they get across to people who aren't like them, and they don't have those social skills. So the one thing that I say to ADHD folks is laugh at your failures, laugh at your mistakes. It's so important that you change your attitude. just like in one area when I talked about, instead of saying necessarily attention deficit hyperactive disorder, you could say something like attention, and I remember it was in there, it's like attention homing or hyperfocused dude, or something where you're putting it in a way that is a positive thing and not a negative. Just like I can have fun with it. I can call it overthinkitis or brain on bongo drums or just monkey brains. But have a laugh over it. Allow yourself to have a laugh over the things you do, and make some comedy out of it. I mean, I worked at a stand-up comedy club in Hawaii for a year. I mean, I've done some fun things. I've worked in talk radio while putting myself through college on Hawaii radio station. Been a cartoonist, been an editorial writer, fun stuff. Didn't always pay the bills, including a talk radio DJ in college too. So I've got to be able to do a lot of things, and I was willing to put myself outside my comfort zone. So I would tell ADHD folks is deal with the thing that makes you uncomfortable, but have support, and then talk about it, laugh about it, come up with a fun word for it. Or if you can't, make it a game where someone else comes. This really, really, really does help, because that is my skill set. For parents, I would say is, what's the thing that your child, whatever age they're at, really enjoys? And can you turn that into something that makes them not just creative, but productive? And I like to say productivity is doing the things that you need to so you can be the person that you want to. Creativity should give you the energy to get things done. Creativity should not be so that I forget the things that I need to get done. And you can trick yourself into turning this into a game. So what I have found from my experiences, talking also with therapists and what they like the word part when they're trying to reinforce a behavior and make it a positive behavior. And if you can come up with a word for that, like I say, master tasking, that helps. It helps because it makes you focus on what you need to do. Or another word I would use is auto magic, what successful people do effortlessly. So it's the easy way to remember what you're trying to aspire to be, or the word you like, a gurk, is I want to be a gurk. Okay, a gurk works on this. This is your gurk homework list kind of thing. I mean, I'm not claiming to have all the answers. I mean, aside from what you and I know, the things that we tell ourselves is eat healthy, is get some good sleep, exercise in the morning, is journal, is meditate. That's hard for younger folks to do too, just like it would have been hard for me. Those things are standards. But I also find there needs to be a creative outlet that encourages the social element in there. I think that's what's missing from a lot of experts in the ADHD industry. They're not talking about how to channel that creative element. I think this can help with all those other things we already know about for adults and parents, and especially with parents maybe like teenage kids, is try a word game. Try a word game over these things. Like I'll give you one fun word that I've used that's really, really true. It's a car jackass. It's where you basically this, when you open up a car in a parking lot, sit down in the seat only to realize you just opened up someone else's car.
Yeah.
I did that twice. I had someone do that to me who told me he had ADHD. I never met him. Here's another one. This is totally true. Gymnesia. Opening up every unlocked locker in your local fitness center because you forgot which locker you placed your exercise bag in. and you look like a crazy person doing that. Now, because I could laugh at that, and I took a photo of myself at the time I did that, take a photo of yourself when it happens, because you'll remember the story. I take that photo, I'll either do a voice note, or I'll put it in Evernote, and I'll type up when it happened. So I'm building that anchor, like you said. I'm doing all these things. I'm building my story as it's happening right there around this word. That's now my prompt. So what happened from there? Well, I now need to take a photo of my locker, because I now trained myself, because I could laugh at my mistake. The one thing that I've learned more than anything about this whole experience of this book, this is great for us and parents, is we beat ourselves up too much over when we make mistakes. Here's the problem. When you do that, you are now dreading the behavior you want to fix. So what happens? You don't end up dealing with that behavior. It's like, oh, I haven't done my taxes, other stuff. I didn't do my taxes for 6 years while having a business. Insane. Dangerously insane. But because even though I was trying to and I couldn't remember, but I was also in a negative space. When you can laugh at your mistakes, when you can put yourself in a positive mood, when you come up with a word for it, this really works in dealing with a behavior you want to fix or improve on.
I love it. I love it, man. Well, Grant, you are freaking inspiration. A man with ADHD writes an entire book that is full of all of your creative little brain droppings. And I think that is admirable. It's amazing. It's really cool. I can't wait to read through the whole thing. Tell people, one, who the book is for specifically, who's going to get the most out of it. I'm sure they'll know exactly where to find it, and we'll put it in the show notes. But tell people who it's for, and then tell people where they can go to learn more about you, where they can go and be social with you, where they can connect with you, talk with you, and learn more about the work that you do.
Well, this book, Grantasms, Creative Twisted Words for Cool People, on Amazon right now in paperback and ebook, is for adults and young adults or older teenagers who value creativity and are looking for an innovative way to have better conversations and connections and have fun doing it. It's not for the type of person who says, that's not a real word. It's for the type of person who's willing to try something different, who's willing to go outside their comfort zone, and who's willing to look at how the words that they're so used to hearing can be interpreted a totally different way. And that's who this is really for. Those people who are probably a little more is those people who are comfortable being on social media, but always realize they could communicate a little better than they probably are doing, who is aware of their social awkwardness. I mean, you can be an extrovert. You can be someone who's really talkative. You can be really good on these spaces, but you're always still aware of, did I come across the way I should have? Oh my gosh, did I do this or that? And that's a good thing. This teaches you to laugh at those things, because as long as you put yourself out there, it's like being in a relationship that as long as you're willing to be vulnerable, that's how you grow. So it's for those people that if you're willing to be a little vulnerable, then you're going to have a great time. You're going to laugh and learn. So also where you can find me, well, since I'm right now doing this as a side hustle, the easiest way is email me at info, at One Twisted Squirrel. That's O-N-E, onetwistedsquirrel.com. That is an actual LLC I got. I'm doing this all above board. It's one thing I learned, even though this is a side business along my full-time job, I'm doing everything by the book. I even got media liability insurance too. So I'm being extra careful. That's my financially minded partner getting me on that path too. So kudos to her. So you can, and tell you what, if you listen to this interview, is reach out to me and say you have a favorite word or phrase, twisted word. Twisted, I mean like something that's just different about it, that makes you a little quirky or quippy about it, and that you'd like to tell someone. I would love to hear that. I'd love to have permission to share that, because this will work. This whole program of trying to do like Grammar Girl meets Joe Rogan, come up with new interesting words and the stories of other people. I am now just starting tomorrow of all time, launching my Instagram channel around One Twisted World. It will be the _1_twisted_squirrel. Just do Twisted Squirrel. No one else is doing it. And every day is going to be an Instagram of a word in there, a word you haven't heard before, or at least my interpretation of it. It's going to be a fun cartoon bubble, and I'm going to look for other ones out there. And so the goal is to do at least one every single day, so that you could have your Grantasm of the day. And for ADHD folks, the Grantasm of the day keeps the ADHD at bay. If you can name it, you can tame it. If you can tame it, you can master it. If you can master it, you can be a super social citizen.
That's amazing. Well, Grant, thank you so much for coming on to Shareable and sharing some of your Grantasms, and as well as your journey with ADHD and how you've managed it and turned it into, I won't say a superpower, but you've been able to use it to your advantage. So I really appreciate you setting aside the time for me. Thank you for coming on the show. I think the information that you gave people was definitely, it had shareability to it, which makes sense because this show was shareable. Wait, don't leave. If you've never listened to my fancy outro, do it just once for me, please. Okay, if you enjoy Shareable and you find it valuable, there's a few ways that you can support the show. One, you can share it on social media, which I strongly encourage. I mean, it's literally the name of the show, Shareable. Two, you can review it on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're an Overcast user, as many of my listeners are, make sure to click that star button on the episodes that you like. The third way that you can support the show is by blogging about it or discussing it on your own podcast, or even by making a YouTube video where you talk about one of the episodes. And then the final way that you can support the show is by supporting it directly on Patreon. You can find the link in the show notes. Now, before I let you go, I want to tell you about one other thing, Shareable.fm, where this podcast is hosted. Do you have a podcast or know someone that has a podcast that you think is particularly, shareable? Well, send them to Shareable.fm to apply to be on the network. Shows that are selected not only get added to the site, and in some cases to the Shareable FM radio podcast, but we also bring together the best tips, tricks, and tactics for promoting your show and growing listenership. And for our headliner and feature shows, we provide fully outsourced social advertising support. So leave the promotion to us, okay? So give it a look, and if you want to find some new and interesting shows, or if you just want additional exposure for your own show or know someone who would benefit, please let them know about it. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Shareable. I sincerely appreciate it, and this show would mean absolutely nothing without you, the listener. So thank you, and I hope to see you back for the next one. Goodbye for now.